Hi folks, it's Salty here. This is my channel, Oh Tara, where we learn to sit in trailers talking about gender and crying. This is my friend Totoro that I've brought to the conversation to help us through this because it's a difficult topic for us to be exploring the relationship between gender and crying, and also the relationship between crying and emotional healing. So I feel that we've been given the ability to cry for a reason, that it's a valuable tool, and it's not this detriment that we have to somehow just, push away or invalidate or shame ourselves for utilizing. Because the reason why we cry is to validate our own experiences and the way that our experiences trigger us from our past memories, and the way that we feel traumatized in the moment when we are crying. It can be re-traumatizing if we cry and then simultaneously shame and guilt ourselves for crying in the first place. And there's lots of different ways that this happens for all genders. But first, I'm going to talk about the masculine end of the spectrum, as I think that it is an incredibly important topic when we are discussing um, male privilege, quote unquote, and how that manifests in our society as a result of emotions and how they're seen. So, men and other masculine genders get this societal training that crying is a sign of weakness instead of crying being seen as a sign of strength. I see crying as a sign of strength because you are facing your fears. One of the fears being, um, one of those fears being seen as weak. That is a fear that masculine people have to face. And it is incredibly brave of somebody to do that. Anyone who's experiencing that fear knows what I'm talking about. When I was transitioning to non binary, a lot of folks pushed a lot of masculine stereotypes on me. When I would be emotional, they would say, "Oh, aren't you non binary?" Like, meaning, aren't you gonna be a man now? And that is a really strange experience to have. I'm sure other AFAB NB folks have felt that. Whereas on the opposite end of the spectrum with AMAB trans people, they may still have residual feelings of guilt for crying and therefore may not be able to experience uh, full release of their feelings when it comes to their traumas as trans femme people. So this is why masculine energy, otherwise known as assertiveness or divine assertiveness, I talk about in my other videos, the grounded masculinity is being able to assert oneself, create boundaries, express negative emotions, and to essentially stand your ground in the world. But that turns into the toxic masculinity. The toxic version of assertiveness is aggression, of outward expressing of anger, instead, in place of feeling your sorrow and feeling your pain. So that's how men have been taught to deal with their emotions. They've been taught not to cry, obviously. And this is what causes the suppression of all of the vulnerable emotions. So that anger ends up being a defense mechanism. And one thing I wanted to talk about in relation to that defense mechanism, in relation to masculine people being taught that they are not allowed to cry, is that when we're addressing these things towards cis men and trans men and non binary people who find themselves more on the masculine end of the spectrum, I want to address the fact that all of their behaviors, all of their undesirable behaviors that are being talked about right now in the media is is a result of that emotional suppression of sorrow, the guarding of their vulnerability, the feeling that they're not allowed to have it. So I think that when we're addressing these things, that we should be allowing of folks and validating of folks when they feel attacked. Their feeling of being attacked, um, it comes from being told that they're bad as a result of the things that they've been taught and the things that they've been essentially forced to do. That it's actually traumatic for masculine people to be told over and over and over again that their sorrow is not okay and that their traumas were essentially nothing and that they should feel nothing about their traumas. So it's a very sensitive thing to try to go about. Try to say, hey, you're taking out your anger in this way and it's really hurting us, and therefore you should be completely subservient towards this message. Therefore, you shouldn't have any feelings about it. Therefore, you should basically kowtow to whatever I'm saying and just accept it. I think that that's an unrealistic expectation. We're it's a vicious cycle. We're looking at behaviors that stem from emotional suppression in the first place, and we're talking about them and we're bringing them to light, which is really important. But then we're also expecting men to react in a non emotional way when being confronted. So I think that this whole uh, this whole joke about drinking male tears and stuff, I think that's kind of not productive because male tears are really important and powerful tears. They should be seen as the man mourning essentially the indoctrination that he's been through, that masculine people have been through this indoctrination. They've had all these gender roles forced on them, all this macho, toxic masculinity. They've been forced to act that way, and they've been told that it's unsafe to act any other way. So I want to say that instead of shaming men for mourning this, that we should allow them to mourn the toxic gender roles that they've been indoctrinated with. On the feminine end of the spectrum, I want to acknowledge the fact that there is a stereotype that women are allowed to cry. I think that that's not true. I think that any woman who's been in an abusive situation has been told to hold back her tears. I think that non-binary people experience this when they're told that androgyny is the same thing as masculinity. So when it's you're viewed as weak for whatever reason and you're crying, then it's, see, I told you you're weak. See, I told you you're weak. So it's not like you're it's not like you're really truly being allowed to cry. It's, oh, you're disturbing the situation. Oh, you're overreacting. Oh, you're the list goes on and on and on. You will not be loved if you feel your emotions. um, Especially if that crying is not just, like coy in the corner type crying. If you're a femme person and you're angry crying and screaming, and that's labeled as drama, it's labeled as unnecessary emotional release, when all emotional release is necessary for anybody across the gender spectrum, no matter what gender you're feeling today. If you're trans and non binary, or if you're a binary gender, if you're cis or trans, You have a right to feel however you feel in the moment. And that overreaction, sometimes that overreaction points to a very deep wound that you have, especially if it's a trigger towards a childhood wound, which most things are. Then you have an opportunity to have emotional release around that wound. And the reason why it's overreaction, right, is because you've been holding that emotion in for years and years and years and years, and you keep getting triggered and you keep getting holding it in, and it's building up and building up and building up. And I think that when you release it, that it's an incredible opportunity to find what that original trauma was and to validate yourself. So, I wanted to talk quick about my wailing experience, um, and what I do to process emotions and do inner child work. So, this is Jack. This is a jacket that my mom embroidered for me when I was young, and it's a symbol of my youth, and it's a symbol of the care that my mom did put into our relationship, even when she wasn't perfect and she was going through her own emotional purging and things like that. I use this piece of clothing as a way to validate my own emotions, because what I'll do is I'll cry or I'll scream into the pillow, and then I'll comfort the pillow and I'll say it's okay to be angry, it's okay to be sad. And I'll just do that and say that as many times as I need to, because what I realized is I have a lot of suppressed emotions that have manifested as pain in my body inside of me. So when I do that emotional release, I'm actually releasing physical pain from my body. My experience with wailing was I got triggered, and we were just driving. I was sitting in the back of the van, and I got the overwhelming urge to just wail. Some screaming, some more like type sounds, more like squeaking type sounds, and really guttural, like type sounds. And like, it was incredible. I cried and I snotted and I made all kinds of faces and stuff for like 30 minutes straight. And I used up half a roll of paper towels, and it was totally okay, because I reached a part of my wound that was really, really, really buried. And what that particular wound was related to was transphobia and homophobia, all the internalized self-hatred of calling myself the T slur and the F slur and making threats towards myself over and over and over again. That was a voice that was trapped inside me that was coming out of me when I was wailing. So that's angry crying. And I see a lot of like jokes about this type of crying on Facebook and stuff. And yeah, it's funny and it's validating. But what I want folks to do is, when it happens to them, I want them to take themselves super seriously and validate their own emotions, either by doing this type of thing or having a Totoro like character in your life. And I'm not just talking about stuffed animals, I'm talking about people. Because I was lucky enough to have my mom there when I was wailing, and she was my inspiration too, because she was the one who showed me how to do that. And she sat there and she said, "Wow, I'm so sorry that you feel that way about yourself from all of your experiences being discriminated against. It really hurts me to know that you have been through that, and I love you." So having a person around that can do that for you after you cry is really nice. So I would suggest, if you don't have necessarily a person that you can trust right now in your life, to seek out a therapist, and that will help you so much. And the last thing I want to say is to learn how to validate your own emotions, to learn how to tell yourself that it's okay to cry, and that it's a wonderful transformative experience that you can congratulate yourself on, no matter what gender you are. Make sure that you're doing it, because if you have any aggressive behaviors or manipulative behaviors, it's because they're guarding a wound, and you can cry that out. You can heal those wounds, and you can heal behaviors that you don't want to perpetuate onto the world through crying, specifically angry crying and wailing. Thank you so much. Smash that like button before you go have yourself a cry, and subscribe to my channel for more content about gender, spirituality, and healing. Thanks, everybody, and have a great day. Mwah.